this focused ambition that comes with the sense of self-importance, it brings people from kind of average talented artists to world stage. And there's no doubt Picasso was on world stage. Dali was always very jealous of Picasso. And he said that Picasso was destroyer of art, concerned with ugliness. And Picasso himself again says these seemingly throwaway lines, women are machines for suffering. He just didn't see them as equals. And the art world will protect that by calling these women his muses, his inspirations. He was an extreme narcissist, and nobody begs to differ. All right, well, today we're looking at Picasso, Pablo Picasso, and in one way, I mean, there's undoubtedly the most famous artist of the 20th century. And I mean, given that he has been popular for a very, very long time, his star might be fading to sort of younger generations. I don't know, perhaps, you know, the art has kind of moved into other directions since then, but incredibly important and powerful artist who I want to look at for sort of for interesting areas that may not be so well known about him. There's no artist, I think, that has been more written about than Picasso, or has had more solo exhibitions than Picasso, that continue to this day. So I think we really need to look at Picasso, and we probably will end up in going into some interesting tangents that tell us about, perhaps, about the art world in general and how the art world works. One of the things that I seem to get a bit recurrently in the comments on the other two presentations that I've done is that I'm criticising artists and saying they have no talent. I'm definitely not saying they are untalented, and I'm sure we'd agree that their aesthetic skills, their drawing skills, etc., are fabulous. And as we'll talk about in other presentations, that's not necessarily, I mean, great skills and great talent as an artist is not enough to succeed in the art world. And we'll talk about that in two presentations' time, because, and we probably between us know a lot of people. I've been teaching for about 30 years, and I've come across extremely talented artists who just don't end up getting very far. And there are just so many other purposes, other reasons at play besides the talent of the artist. But I get a little bit tired of the fact that by criticising or by opening debate about an artist, that I'm challenging their skill level. I mean, that's kind of the least of it, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
So looking at Picasso, he knew he was famous. I mean, he was famous in his lifetime, famous early on in his lifetime, and his fame has accrued and continues to this day. And for him, he was always conscious that his fame meant notoriety, meant sales, meant influence, meant celebration. He really sought those things out. There was none of this shying away. There's none of this accidental, extremely ambitious artist right from the beginning. And charismatic person, there's no doubt. He carried a lot of charisma and very prolific. I don't know that there is another artist who has produced so many artworks. You know, the numbers vary depending how they're counted, but, you know, 50,000 or so artworks that have come up in auctions and so on, 13,500 paintings. To date, about 4,000 solo exhibitions around the world, and it still garner huge crowds. And there are now 3 museums specifically dedicated to Picasso, the main one being in Paris. He's undoubtedly worth an enormous amount that's increasing in the secondary market, or what we call the auction house market, tertiary market. So his artworks change hands for considerable sums. And if we sort of estimated at his death, his estate was worth, $500 million to $1 billion is probably even conservative looking back. Just some of the recent artwork sales are enormous. And the reason we spend even any time at all talking about his estate is that he left no will, and there was, I don't know, perhaps it was 6 years, 10-year legal issues going on between his many children about their inheritance. So his estate was a sort of subject of contention, as are the continuing value of his artworks. Most of his poor children didn't get very much from Picasso, really, except these artworks, I would say. The other thing is, of course, he's Picasso as being, in a sense, people use the word pet, he should be cancelled because his womanizing, his misogyny, his cruelty to women is notorious and is unchallenged, actually. There's nobody, not his partners, his lovers, his children, his friends, his dealers, his servants. Nobody would disagree. He was a really horrible man. I mean, really, really difficult, really, could be extremely charming, but it was completely disloyal and cruel and really, we've got to get on with this in a minute about just his treatment, his particular for his wives. So in the Me Too generation, I mean, he's really a very, very big fish. But let's think about this. What does it mean to cancel Picasso? I mean, he's dead. We can't kind of say, well, he'll never work in this town again. He's kind of, it's a bit too late for that. But the point is this reassessment of, the artist against the artwork is being brought to the fore. And I guess where people will stand now is they'll say, well, okay, he was difficult, he was a genius, you allow him this, this license because he was a genius. And, I think there's something else going on. And what my argument has always been in the other presentations as well as this one is that we want to read the artwork for the message, for the clues. And that's what art history, what visual analysis is all about. And we want to look at that. And I don't think as many people have as should have been when they're talking about these issues around his personality. There's somebody there who's just a bottom right-hand corner there who is arguing that Picasso, maybe he was a feminist, which is a bit of a long shot, I think. He was just so horrible to be. He charmed people. There he is down below with Lee Miller, the photographer, and obviously really, really, really charming. But, I mean, she was not especially close with him. Hannah Gadsby, I don't know if she's made her way in fame to the UK. Is that a name you're familiar with in the UK, Hannah Gadsby?
It's not for me personally, no.
No, yeah, she's very, very big in Australia and I think America. I think she had quite an audience in America. A gay woman, quite outspoken. I think her performances are somewhere between, well, pathos and comedy. I think she has challenged a lot of interesting things about what is comedy and what does comedy mean. But she trained as in art history. She studied and has a degree in art history, and she was very openly critical of Picasso and the way that we just admire someone who is so horrific to the women around him. And she actually got to curate an exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum a couple of years ago, which was not very successful, I might say. But anyway, it's just somebody who's it's sort of very current in a sense in that it sort of made waves and brought to the attention of a wider audience this debate about what do we do about Picasso. So Annie Leibovitz, the famous portrait photographer, Rolling Stone, etc., has obviously positioned her as one of Picasso's from his blue period there. I don't think it would have quite done for Annie Leibovitz to present her as one of the Cubist weeping women. That would have been a bit undercutting her message. So Picasso said things like, there are only two kinds of women, goddesses and doormats. And they sound like throwaway lines, but he kind of meant it, I think. Why should we deny that he meant just that he treated women as absolutely, idolized. And this is the thing about domestic violence, is that we often ask, why do women stay so long? Is because there are many reasons, of course, but one of them can be that women are treated, you're the only woman in the world, you're my muse, you're my goddess, you're wonderful. And then the next minute is literally emotional abuse, physical abuse, or torture, really, emotional torture, and physical harm. The people who are speaking out recently, there have been a number of new documentaries about Picasso because the heirs to his estate have now those legal issues have been settled, but they include people like Paloma Picasso and I've just gone blank on her name, the granddaughter of Marie Therese. Uh, so I what was I saying? So these people who have a great interest in keeping his name and his, in particular, his financial status alive. I mean, he was their father and grandfather. I say that they had some nice experiences as children, but they did not have very good experiences growing up
Mm.
beyond that. And a lot of the people, of course, they'll choose to speak in these documentaries are women. So, the whole, putting forward the idea that he was actually somehow, we could actually see strong women associated with Picasso and surviving, which is, I think, a bit of a myth. Um, this is the kind of way the artworks, gain in value. Just as an example, quite a famous one, The Dream, Le Rêve, um, which was bought initially in 1941 by some collectors, soon becomes an object of investment, hedge funds, etc. And
Mm.
1997, 2001. This one's just an interesting one because uh, Steve Cohen uh, wanted to buy this work from Steve Wynn, who's a Las Vegas casino millionaire, squillionaire. Um, and as they were making the transaction, he accidentally put his elbow, his elbow through the painting. So suddenly the deal, was stopped. The painting had to be
Oh, wow.
conserved and then resold. And eventually Steve Cohen did buy the artwork. But I don't know. It kind of just these things are treated as objects of investment. And as we know, money laundering, it's a very popular area for money laundering because you can legitimize money from ill-gotten gains.
Hmm.
And I understand that in the cryptocurrencies, it's a great way for people to realize, these auction houses now take Bitcoin, can realize this, illusory money.
Mm, interesting.
Yeah. So this was just about some of the inheritance scandal on the left there, and um, I can't impress enough. I mean, in one way we sort of think, well, as an art lover, what do I care about these people making these silly investments? But it's kind of mad. There are people who are hedge fund managers for Picasso artworks where someone will own a 25th of a Picasso. That will be their investment. They never see the painting in person. They never enjoy the artwork. They're not collectors. They just own a piece of Picasso, which
Mm.
becomes a piece of property.
So I suppose Picasso is like
Um,
a money launderer's dream, then, in a way. I suppose you could
yeah,
work
yeah,
intimately
yeah,
with
because he's
him.
solid.
Well, you could say to
Yeah.
him, "Could you paint something for me that I can use to launder this money with?" And maybe you get a cut of it. But that's speculation on my behalf. I can see that legitimately
Well,
happening in the realm of art.
yeah. Yeah, he was notoriously tight with money himself. I mean, he made a lot of money, but he did from time to time give people an artwork instead of payment. And so he saw his artwork as, I don't know whether commodity is the right word, but as
Mm.
an investment piece. Um, but yeah, they keep breaking records. 2023, the most valuable, you know, artwork that year. Um, but all of these objections that we have about Picasso's misogyny really haven't heard. I haven't got the slideshow, how have I? Haven't heard the art sales, and so his notoriety. I just think the investment market just doesn't really care much.
Mm.
Whether they do when they're sitting in people's homes, I don't know. So, look, he was a narcissist. He was an extreme narcissist, and nobody begs to differ. So, constant need for admiration, for being the center of attention, really manipulative and exploitative. As I said, to partners, to the many lovers that he cheated on, long term, short term, his servants. But he really did seem to leave his, allow his greatest cruelty to be inflicted on the women who are closest to him. And we're not to underestimate, domestic abuse. We know it's complicated and it's consistent. It's usually behind closed doors. And in Australia, we're very aware of that because the statistic is that, sadly, one woman a week on average, dies of domestic violence in Australia. One woman a week. And whew, that's just, I mean, it's shocking. This is current. And let alone all of the damage, the emotional, breakdowns, the family, catastrophes that occur by what is still an epidemic. It's hard to believe. It's still an epidemic. Very sadistic. I mean, literally sadistic in many ways. He stubbed a cigarette out on Francoise Gillot's face at one stage. Was cruel in terms of Francoise Gillot and Dora Maar were both very accomplished artists themselves, but he actively stymied their careers when they split. So he stopped them having exhibitions. He told their dealers to drop them, unnecessarily vindictive.
Yeah, sounds like a typical narcissist behavior, to be honest, doesn't it?
Yeah,
always
a
in
really
control.
Textbook narcissist.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
The thing is, I mean, just to be in the art world, I think you find narcissism is probably a favored trait at these type of levels, to be honest. I mean, because you become a center of attention in a way, and it's kind of that supply that they crave. What better way to get it than to create crappy artwork, sell yourself as some kind of profound genius, and get all the adulation of the masses just for producing anything you can,
And this focused ambition, like we'll talk about this in a couple of presentations' time, this absolute drive and focused ambition that comes with the sense of self-importance, it brings people from, kind of average talented artists to world stage. And there's no doubt Picasso is on world stage.
Yeah.
So these are just the women that are kind of significant in his life in terms of that they had reasonably long relationships. There are many, many other, affairs and so on that he had throughout his life. And I don't know, someone would have to, somebody probably has somewhere done a nice graph about how they all overlap. And usually the women didn't know about one another's, but you can see that he also was fond of drawing them, painting them. They were his muses, his models. And as we'll talk about, what those images actually say about these women. So he said, each time I leave a woman, I should burn or destroy the woman, the past she represents. So you see the difference between, on the left, Olga Kukovla, who was the ballet dancer, Russian ballet dancer that he married, and the way he first painted her. This is his artwork. And on the right, when he was trying to leave her, he was trying to break up. She didn't want a divorce, and he was extremely cruel to her. And I mean, this is just a horror image, isn't it?
It's terrifying, absolutely terrifying.
It is. Yeah. And even here, I mean, where he's reduced he's completely stylistically, experimenting, very, very skilled and talented and creative, all of those things. And even this is really harsh. He's treating her as, I don't know, she's somewhere between a still life and a broken, some kind of broken knife or sword. I mean, they're really quite brutal, even in the simplicity and beauty. So there've been many, many biographies on Picasso, as there've been many documentaries, but John Richardson has probably the largest history of Picasso with a 4-volume set, and he said he himself, who's an admirer of Picasso, said Picasso needed sexual excitement from different women to rejuvenate his psyche, reawaken his imagery, and inspire a brilliant sequence of paintings. So, I mean, something like that is a bit half-heartedly kind of admiring him for the, using women as the sort of juice and fire that is needed for an ego and a talent like Picasso to exist. And Picasso himself, again, says these seemingly throwaway lines, women are machines for suffering. He just didn't see them as equals.
That is a dramatic phrase, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And this one on the left we know quite well in Australia because the National Gallery of Victoria has it, and it was one of Picasso seemed to be being stolen from time to time. I guess because they are so notorious and so valuable, they're often artworks that are stolen by thieves. So that was stolen for a little while and has now since been returned. And Dora Maar again on the right, woman dressing her hair. So it's almost like he's finding how many ways can I depict a woman as a horrifying, you know, broken, fractured, ghastly object.
Mm.
He said that the Dora Maar on the left, who was the model for Weeping Woman, was crying because of Guernica, the bombing of Guernica, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I don't know, a lot of them seem to be crying not about Guernica.
It doesn't seem like it.
So Marina Picasso, his granddaughter, was this very, very outspoken against him, and has donated all of the money from her, as far as I know, from her ownership of artworks, has donated them to various charities. I don't think she wants to live with any of the paintings. Picasso submitted them to his animal sexuality, tamed them, bewitched them, ingested them, crushed them. And after he'd spent many nights extracting their essence, they were bled dry, he'd dispose of them. I mean, he just got tired and bored with these women.
Mm.
And Hemingway, who was a colleague of Picasso, again, sort of Picasso only thinks the women are to sleep with or to paint. Again, not necessarily criticising for that, just as if saying that his genius demanded that. And, still to this day, I mean, they are caricatures. I don't think we look enough at these paintings as, we look at their colour and, very attractive usually, I mean, if not, challenging sometimes colour ranges and skillful use of space and all the things, but they are, always extremely sexualised and brutalised female figures. So Kate Blanchett recently speaking out about don't cancel great artists just because of their personal foibles, which I think is a bit limp. Foibles is a bit more. I mean, he was outright abusive. I mean, he was doing things that were illegal, that are illegal now and were illegal then, but he was getting away with. So I think this is a bit a bit slim for her to say something like this. My guess is she owns at least one Picasso. She owns a lot of artwork and is making a gallery in Suffolk, I understand.
Sounds about right, doesn't it? Yeah.
I do like this as a cartoon. Hello, my eyes are over here. I think that's kind of anyway, that's quite a clever Paul Note cartoon. So, we use this word, I hate this word muses, I hate this, as if they didn't have their own lives to lead, their own interests, their own ups and downs, their own interior life, all of these things. They were really just useful to Picasso. And the art world will protect that by calling these women his muses, his inspirations. And, as a collection, they are really, really frightening. So it's not like he went through a bad phase or did a few. He did this over his lifetime for a good, 70 years of depicting women like this. And I'm saying, what's missing in Kate Blanchett's, statement, apart from the fact that there are more than foibles, was that these artworks are horrifying. They are really, and I'm sure from your perspective, you recognise this kind of clownish aspect to them.
Mm-hmm.
And just for people out there who might be new to this channel, definitely go and look at Paul's research, fantastic research on the Nephilim look like clowns. And looking on the left, there are a lot of African, other tribal artworks that we'll see, we'll discuss in a minute about Picasso collecting. But these kind of figures, which were obviously had an influence on the way Picasso was depicting women. And not really talked about enough. You'd be surprised. I mean, we know Picasso collected African, particularly African art, masks and figures, but nobody sort of says, "Hey, hang on, why is he depicting the women in this way?" So these are literally from his collection. These are literally objects he bought in his own collection.
Look at those.
He was a bit into masks too, and some of it you just think, as we sort of say, clowning around, just being a bit silly. But he did like to ham it up for the camera, and especially when he was wearing a mask. So, okay, there's a tradition of carnival masks in Spain, in France. But what's this with the goat? It's kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, there's a tradition with the Harlequin, which you would know more about than I do, but the carnival mask with the black figure,
Yeah,
which
well,
I think,
Harlequin is originally his name is Arlecchino from Italian tradition. From he's said to be like a typical drunk from Bergamo or something like this, but he's kind of also mixed with Northern European Teutonic traditions of the hairy wild beast man, basically, who has a club, so the wild man. And those two things kind of came together into a traveling tradition of the Commedia dell'arte, which was Italian improvisers and performers traveling around from village to village, from country to country, all through Europe during what we call the Dark Ages, shall we say, the 500s to 1500 period. And out of that tradition became this character called Arlecchino, or Harlequin in the French tradition, which is, again, this blend of Mediterranean gods like Mercury, Dionysus with his thyrsus, or Mercury with his staff, quick-footed, fleet of foot, and energetic and sexually charged and frivolous, mixed with the hairy wild beast man of the north, the wild man, and you get Harlequin. And Harlequin gets its name specifically from Harlequin, or Hurricane, which is the French tradition of that's what they called their hairy wild beast man representation of the forest, who had a band of merry demons following him around everywhere. So when he was introduced into the Commedia dell'arte, it was because he's a stock character everybody would recognize, no matter where you went in Europe. Everybody knew the wild man. Everyone has their wild man traditions, which go way back to Thracian culture, spread all throughout Europe, and it's very much a cremation of care type of tradition. They dress up in wild, hairy beast costumes. They have a wild party. They accost the young women in the villages, and then they have usually burn a giant effigy of a hairy wild beast of some kind, and then they fast for a 40-day period afterwards of something like that, after this night of excess, dressed like the wild man. Obviously, this Commedia dell'arte picked up on this tradition and added Harlequin as a character. But Harlequin originally didn't really look like this. Harlequin looks like a brute beast with a beast mask with the nose turned up and a horn sticking out. And it kind of, as the tradition developed, Harlequin turned into this tight leotard wearing, lithe mask type of fancy lad about town type of image instead. And that's when clown took over and became more like the traditional version of Harlequin, which is the demon aspect. And Harlequin originally was demonic, very demonic in nature, rude, crude, vicious, quick-witted, out for himself type of character, and he was supposed to be. He was the wild man. That's what he was supposed to be. That was his role, So for Picasso here to be painting what's basically a representation of a European demon at its core, that's exactly what it is. That's their flavor of Nephilim, So it's interesting.
Yeah. I feel as it completely aware of all of those aspects you were talking about, this Dionysian, outrageous, coarse, wild figure, and is subverting that in this case in 1918, quite an early work for Picasso. And I mean, he's kind of showing the sad clown, isn't he? The kind of the wistful look in his eyes alone. We would not see Harlequin having an inner life. Harlequin is always with other people, isn't he, in groups and in orgiastic activities. But he's sort of the classic the portrait cloth behind him, and it's a bit like this kind of who am I kind of. That's what I think this one's about. It's not typical of Picasso. It's early Picasso, and I think it is interesting because Picasso is absolutely aware of popular culture and participated. I know in a lot of these kind of carnival parades and so on.
In this picture, it's literally a mask-off moment. He's taking his mask off.
Yeah.
Who am I underneath all of this, really? And he wouldn't be painting something like this if he wasn't truly trying to speak to his own inner turmoil and his own view of who he is, publicly represented to who he is behind the scenes type of thing. And it's a very grey, drab, dark, miserable background contrasted to this otherwise colourful persona that's in the front, Yeah, so who knows what he was thinking.
And when we think about his use of colour, it's like he subdued the colour of Harlequin to show this more sombre side. So I kind of would have been interested if he'd pursued that line of inquiry rather than this kind of celebration. So this is 1921. So this is Harlequin with a mask and musicians and so on. But this is like he's now become this kind of kind of raucous, colourful, celebratory, abstracted version of a Harlequin.
I think that's Poirot next to Harlequin there, the clown. I think
yes.
It is. I think that's Pedrolino.
The stock figure.
Yeah, Pedrolino, the other servant of the rich man. So that could be the old rich man that's next to him. And traditionally, Harlequin played the role of the servant to the rich man, and so did Pedrolino, who was the foil to Harlequin's energy. Harlequin was witty and quick and funny. Pedrolino was slow and dumb and quick to the uptake, and they were both servants of the rich man. So their comedy came from their kind of back and forth, Right. I think that's just what this is here. It's a play on that.
Yeah. And when you think about it, those two figures are the musicians, and this third figure, whether it's the rich man or the employer, if that is a demonic figure, as we might, begin to surmise, that would lead a less than celebratory, reading of an artwork like this.
Absolutely.
As I said, very fond of wearing masks, so joking around. The one on the left is a bullfighter's mask. Picasso loved bullfighting. He loved the gore. He loved the cruelty. He loved everything about the blood, everything about bullfighting. And this is a bullfighter's practice mask. So this is, somebody when they're training to become a toreador would wear a mask like this, and Picasso owned it. And on the right there, as a bull. So he loved this persona, and these are fairly innocent versions of what is really a minotaur. We'll come back to in a minute. These kind of are creepy as this is Picasso clowning around in masks he just made for the camera. I mean, these are really creepy to me.
They are, aren't they? Very clown-like, I would say.
Yeah.
Very ghostly and
demonic. Yeah, evil clown, isn't it?
Something like that. I mean, there's something to be said in acting as well, and my research has kind of come across this aspect that people who wear masks can easily lose themselves and be possessed by the idea of the mask or what it is. And there's something about when people wear masks, they otherwise would behave in ways they wouldn't normally behave. And I've even seen some really weird footage of people losing it when they put a mask on, like completely changing and screaming and wailing, and it's like a common practice apparently in theatre troupes where they train to do this is kind of put on this mask and just lose yourself, and people, when they do hide their face, something happens psychologically. Some people change. People do change.
It's very weird. I've heard that too from contemporary drama schools, that it's just an exercise. At some point they will be asked to wear masks, and what they find is, well, of course they can't express with face anymore, and they're not allowed to use voice, so their body has to express, and they find themselves doing movements that they've never considered before.
Exactly.
So this kind of bizarre behavior accrues. So we've looked at these are sort of horrific clown images, relatively contemporary. But how much is he drawing these women in that same kind of regard? I mean, these are it's one step from clownish, but they're all kind of brutal and angular and distorted and broken and shattered and miserable. We also can go there where people who dress up in drag are mocking women in a way that has kind of been forgotten. And I look forward to the day when people dressing up as women to make a mockery of them in these bizarre makeup and costumes is seen as the equivalent of wearing blackface. It's very insulting to women themselves. There's no doubt they are making a mockery, a parody, a bizarre parody of women.
It has certainly got more extreme over the past decade as well, the whole drag style, and it's kind of run away with itself, that's for sure. I think maybe not that long ago, maybe a couple of decades ago, I think it was a lot more toned down, a lot more tongue-in-cheek, a little less serious, but I feel like there's a whole culture surrounding this this thing now, which is
Yes, it's become a glamour thing, hasn't it? Whereas I don't
Yeah.
know, not that I'm an expert, but Danny Rue and people, and they used to call them female impersonators, and just the
Hmm.
fact that they'd be on stage making gestures and wearing a dress was just hilarious or entertaining. But there's this mockery has just got up to 11 now, and it
Mm.
filters down too, not just this high-end glamour and copying bizarre Hollywood kind of model world makeup, but it's kind of become normalized as well.
just on that note. I do think based on my own work, which is the Nothing But Like Clowns, people might not understand what I'm saying there, but there is definitely an undercurrent in modern society to push clown-like aesthetics on the culture at large. Just in 2023 alone, Elle Fashion Week, every catwalk all throughout Europe had clown fashion going down the runways, and it's because I think and what you see on the runways is very extreme. You wouldn't see in the outlets, but what trickles down into the outlets is something inspired by what you see on the runways, and it's like a more watered down version. I definitely do think there's been this push over the past maybe decade and a half to really make people or encourage people to dress more and more in colorful aesthetics, dehumanize themselves, deconstruct what it means to be a self or a person. It's where we find the pronouns thing kind of came in as well. The bright colored hair, the body modification type of culture kind of came in. And like I said, if you compare that to the work of Picasso, as you kind of were doing there, what he was doing was deconstructing these people into caricatures. And a clown is a caricature at the end of the day. A clown is an amalgam, I would say, of Nephilim features from my own work. But what we're really talking about here is something not human. It's kind of a dehumanization of the image is the best way to kind of describe it.
And I think these young women in these kinds of images, they're dressing up mostly for TikTok or Instagram. I don't think they're going to work like this. I think, but this is this idea that this is something that that you have this persona that becomes becomes, well, how far from from the real, from the internal world. But these women had no control or input as to how they were depicted. And as I said, you can see photographs of them. They really, just have to say, they really look nothing like that. They were all pretty beautiful women in various kinds of natural, kind of fashion of the time. But I mean, what kind of a mind has to depict women in this way? Women that he apparently loved. So I know someone's going to say, "Oh, they were just handy as his models." Well, so was Fruit. Fruit was handy, He loves dogs. There's hardly any dog paintings. He loved dogs. He had dogs around who just slept in his studio all the time. I just say that the subject matter of choosing women to pull apart is horrible.
So can you imagine him saying to them? Can you imagine saying to them something like, "If only you could see yourself how I see you," and then he makes these paintings. It's like, maybe they don't want to see how he sees you. This is disturbing.
And more than one of these women who are crossovers, who didn't know that they were being cheated on, found out when they found the portraits of these other women in his studio. So that was how they found out that he was sneaking around behind their backs. So, as I say, one of the most horrible, this, it's called, I mean, in psychoanalytic terms, that all call it vagina dentata. The idea of, being sexually close with a woman like this is going to just, it's going to damage you. She's just a beast. She's just a monster, literally a monster that will devour a man.
Is that right? Is that how they twisted it?
Yeah, and then he's presenting himself always as this kind of man in charge, and I'm sure he had self-doubts, but he's not allowing them in his life or in his painting. We'll see a couple of exceptions, I think. So this is one of his works that I stand by to some degree. And do I want to own it? No, thank you. Do I want to have it on my wall at home? No, thank you. But this is an artwork that I think really has merit, and I'd like to discuss a little bit because I sort of have a policy of not discussing in any great detail an artist that I think hasn't done something that contributes positively, something meaningful, significant to our culture, which is why I find it hard to to find myself putting a presentation together on Marina Abramovich. I will talk about her in a few presentations' time, but her artwork itself is just so insignificant and, invaluable really to look at. But we will look at her because she's a cultural phenomenon. So Les Demoiselles d'Avignon was a 1907 work, as you can see. Very, very large, much larger than any other work that he's made before. So 2.5 meters. So we're talking about the height, floor to ceiling in most houses. So really, really large and like nothing he'd done before. And I'll just see, I think what have I got next? And we talk about, or the way it's talked about in art history, is proto-cubism. It predates cubism, this shattering of space, this reducing the field in front of us into interlocking planes. It's seen as and influenced by cinema. So remember, George Braque and Picasso were both doing more or less the same thing with this Picasso in space. And, again, people are welcome to their own, likes and dislikes, but I don't find very much interesting in this cubism. It seems to be almost like an intellectual exercise and a dead end, because he kind of abandoned it, or they both did. He and Braque both abandoned it after a few years. But the breakthrough work of Demoiselles is something else. And have I got that next? Perhaps I'd talk on this one. So what's really breakthrough, what's really shattering space, is the way that he's configured it as an impossible space. So remember, we have the history of one-point perspective since the Renaissance, so that the artwork would unfold before us, different from Byzantine art or Chinese art that would show a kind of flatness. But this artwork, there's no fixed position for the viewer. There's no one position for the viewer to see, as there is in a traditional, since Renaissance, one-point perspective painting. So he's broken up the space, but given it also multiple perspectives at once. So the figures in the middle there are, when we kind of try to make sense of them, are more likely to be lying down. It makes more sense if they have arms up, lying on sheets. And there's this, overlaying of these upright figures, which also don't necessarily seem to be occupying the same space. And this sense of revealing, it's a curtain that's being shown to us. We are meant to be looking. It is prioritizing the sense of looking. And it's made of interlocking planes that are almost like broken glass or tears. There's something very brutal. Even the shape of the melon below that fruit is sort of, again, like a scimitar or a sword. There's glass-like shattering. So I find it's nowhere to rest, and extremely unusual, as we'll see, in terms of ways of depicting a female nude. Hannah Gadsby was pretty cruel about it. She said, Cubism, all the perspectives at once. Are any of those perspectives of women's? No, you just put a kaleidoscope filter on your cock. So she's pretty cruel, but she's just saying it's reducing it to a kind of like an appearance. So a couple more proto-cubist paintings, one by Georges Braque. They were friends. Picasso and Braque were friends and kind of encouraged one another in doing something was, after all, completely new. So a little bit more about this painting. It's seen as, very confronting. I mean, there's no doubt that these are women looking back at us. It's called Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, the Women of Avignon. And Avignon was a street in Barcelona. So it's not the town in France. It's a street in Barcelona where the brothels were. And Picasso's father used to go regularly to the brothels first in Malaga, where they grew up, and then when they moved to Barcelona. And Picasso's father would go every Sunday after church. He'd go to the brothel. And when Picasso was 13, his father took him as a rite of passage to the brothel to have sex with the women there. 13. And I mean, to me, that's, kind of one of the most horrifying things in Picasso's life, that he was taken at age 13. Can you imagine what this painting depicts, I think, is being looked at by incredibly powerful naked women. These are women who are not ashamed of their bodies. I mean, that's their job. That's their profession, to display their bodies, who are kind of dominating. I mean, our eye level is much, much lower than the centre of the painting, isn't it? As the viewer, we are looking up at these women who are glaring at us, And you could say, well, you know, they're offering us sexuality. Yes, that's what it seems very clear. It's a you know, brothel transaction. But there's something also really intimidating about their gaze. And I think if you think of it from a 13-year-old's perspective, I doubt that he'd had a long, hard look at any naked women up until that point, let
Mm.
alone, you know, older women, you know, not part of family or, I don't know, bathing or any of those situations. It must have been, I would say, absolutely traumatic. I really feel that. And I don't think enough is made about that when people talk about Picasso and what occurred throughout his life, this kind of attraction and horror and fear and wishing to tame women. And, you know, this is not really even amateur psychology. There is some mention made of it. I just think not enough. I think this would scar his, you know, his relationship or his some fundamental fear and sexuality together. So his perspective is our perspective. If we look at the way the women are looking at us or beyond us or revealing, Rosalind Krauss, the famous critic, has called it the trauma of the gaze, so that even the looking is an act of sexual violence. John Berger talks about this painting and says the thing about it, the longer you look at it, is that it's not just about, you know, sexual availability. These women actually look sad. They actually looked even trapped. He says it's almost like looking at them through the palings of a fence. It's unsettling for many reasons. It's not just this kind of, you know, come hither, you know, sexually available
Mm.
presentation. So I feel that this has, you know, that's a little bit, resolution's gone a bit there. The faces are repeated.
Yeah.
The figures, you know, they're very stocky, staunch. I mean, it's a very different way of painting flesh. What I feel is, you know, really, you know, maverick about it is that he's painting female flesh with strength. You know, I'm not saying it's you know, admirable exactly, but there's something radical about the way he's presenting the women in charge of this space, unlike the tradition of the female nude all through history, which is, you know, this kind of peekaboo looking through the keyhole at the Turkish bath, all these women just lolling around, waiting to be chosen, all their breasts ripe for picking, all that spongy, fleshy body, this fleshy flesh that's got nothing to do with it. It's almost like, this is more than once, to me, it looks like, you know, slugs in a bucket or something. It's just writhing, anonymous.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's kind of, it's just a kind of horrible. I mean, they're just awful. This is Jerome, the slave market. Oh, so this is an upright figure, and yet, oh, and you know, again, Ingres, the grand odalisque. So this is 100 years before Picasso, but we know the tradition. Just reminding people of that. Dali, who I absolutely loathe, but, you know, because, I mean, his occult stuff is really on the surface. I don't know that we need to talk too much about him, but it's just very interesting, this slug aspect of the female nude. This is a horrible painting of his called The Bather from 1928. But at least
Mm.
he puts that on the surface, but in a way that's just abject, that's just revolting, disgusting. And Picasso became clever, I think, about putting this kind of revoltingness, this horror aspect of the female body, you know, as a sea urchin or as a slug or as a weird monster creature. You know, he tamed that after Demoiselles d'Avignon. So Titian, so the tradition goes way, way back, you know, the female, you know, sexually available. And then the dog at her feet that represents loyalty. So she has to be all this available to one man. And Picasso used to notoriously to more than one lover used to lock the door so that when he went out they couldn't leave the house.
Mm.
And Manet, you know, good 40, 50 years before Picasso, but it's a radical thing about Olympia, about many wonderful things that Manet did, really radical things, was that he was showing a female courtesan in her profession, none of this dressed up like Greek nymphs or elegant society ladies. This was a working woman waiting to receive a customer, her black servant there with the flowers, the the cat representing abandoned sexuality, and her gaze completely meeting the viewer. I mean, it absolutely shocked France and shocked Paris for many, many, many decades, and Manet challenging that directly. And I just have to put in the Guerrilla Girls who, amongst their billboards and posters, do women have to be naked to get into the Met Museum? So less than 4% of the artists in modern art are women, but 76% of the nudes are female. So presenting women as this, sexually valuable objects. One of the really different things about Les Demoiselles is that Picasso worked on it for 2 years. This is really unlike. This is an artist who would make 2 or 3 artworks in a day, a very skilled, very confident drawer and painter. He never made anything that he spent this long on. And he worked on it and worked on over 100 preparatory drawings. And he used to call it quel bordel. People would, his painter friends, he'd talk about what you're working on. And, he worked on a few other things in between. But this is a real sort of like challenging himself to get this to work. And quel bordel means my mess, my brothel, my mess in French slang. But it became known later on as his philosophical brothel. So somehow trying to render meaningful this bizarre chaotic space. If Picasso had made this one work and we could have drawn the line under female nudes or presenting women as, I would be his greatest champion. It's so different, I say, so different to the attitude that he has to women in his later works. As I say, it's not a comfortable artwork. It's not one I'd want to live with, but it's really powerful and meaningful. Some of his other influence, he looked at lots of other artworks. I always tell people, artists look at lots of other artists' work, and even the idea of having the arms raised in this, we'd call it homoerotic work by Michelangelo from 1500s, The Dying Slave. These looked at lots for his sketches. He'd also looked at Isadora Duncan. So that's just as a sketch, the dancer. So it's the body in motion, the body as with agency, the body, yes, as a site, to be looked at, but with a life force. And really closely looking at Gauguin. So this chunky, strong figures. So when Gauguin went to Tahiti, one of the things that amazed him was how comfortable people were with their bodies. And his... he had a lot of mythologies about the women too, and he abused his position, had sex with younger women and so on. But there was no shame. They carried no shame in their nudity. And look, I even when I first went to the Cook Islands about 30, 40 years ago, women were topless and it was not seen as sexual. Older women, younger women. Our culture is obsessed with this, the sexualization of naked bodies. The figure on the right is a goddess figure that Gauguin made, like a fictitious goddess that he made out of clay. You can see the foot comes directly from Gauguin's artwork.
Yeah.
So Picasso literally sketching. And this, I think these are in a way tributes. They're not necessarily, and even this revealing aspect, this kind of presenting the side view, a little bit Egyptian, that side view, front view mix. And the figure on the right with this blinded eyes, like there are masks on the right-hand side there, but this figure that Gauguin has done, it's kind of, you have to sort of think a lot about it, but the idea that the gaze, the eyes, the looking, that has become a sexualized thing in our culture. And he invented this ceramic goddess. So he made his own little idol, Gauguin, in 1894. So it's not a figure from Tahitian culture.
Just looking at the painting, I feel like you said, it's unlike anything else he's ever done. He's never spent that much time obsessing over how it's going to look. He made, like I said, a lot of sketches, a lot of images, a lot of precursors, a lot of playing around with composition, a lot of figuring out how the masks and how the faces are going to look. And obviously he had multiple inspirations for this one. And I'm just thinking, you told the story of how his father took him to a brothel at 13. And just as an artist myself, the reason, and probably this is probably the reason why this painting is so profound and speaks on many levels, and you can't help but admire it for what it is and what it conveys, is probably, it seems like he was dealing with trauma through this in some way.
Yeah.
He was really trying to process some deep-rooted mental imagery that's scarred into his brain, from a young age.
Yeah, I feel so.
And and he had to do this. This was his therapy in some way, to internalize it, deal with it, move on from it, and which is why it's so, like I said, it has this pull to it of this actually means something, in a sense.
Yeah,
this actually,
I feel that too.
And I can just see it. I can see it immediately. And I'm not, clearly it didn't work. It didn't heal him in any way, as a therapist, as far as therapy goes. But it's, hurt people at the end of the day. And it seems like he was severely traumatized by his father's actions. And this,
There's a genuine working through, isn't there? Whereas I sometimes think that, when we say, like the way Picasso became in his artwork, very confident, sort of churning out these artworks, kind of quoting himself, kind of, this is how I do it. Of course, he kept being, challenging and visually and creative, but nothing of this rawness. We can feel that. And he didn't show the painting for another, there are various artists visited him, just his, in Montmartre where they were living, and would come and see the work. And they all said, this is horrible. You can't show this. This is really shocking. These were his friends, and these were, pretty out there artists themselves. He didn't show it in an exhibition until 1916, so almost 10 years later, a small exhibition in Paris. And it was only 1939 that it was bought by the Museum of Modern Art in New York and got shown in public. So that's how much it meant, how terrifying this painting was. He knew this was something beyond, as outside of his control.
Yeah.
Oh, and another thing, very significant too. While he was working on this artwork, he was just living in this dreadful old squat, the laundry boat, they used to call it, because it was a creaky old building, really a wreck in Montmartre. And he was living with Fernanda, who at the time, we'll see her in a minute, and she walked into the studio, and on more than one occasion while he was working on it, super hot weather, he worked on it at night. What often surprises me is how badly lit the buildings he was in were, and yet he still painted. I mean, candlelight, poor side lighting, not the classic artist studio at all. But anyway, he was working on this painting late at night and chanting. Right. And he was doing this low trance-like chanting. And she wrote about it in a way that she thought it was really odd. And he stopped, embarrassed, when he saw her. So there's something also in this painting that's registers that kind of, like going to this weird, deep place. So he hadn't really resolved the painting when in early 1907, he went to the Trocadero Museum of Ethnology, not there now in Paris, but became the Museum de la Homme, or the collection, but all this ethnographic masks and objects and tools and boats and so on, mainly from the French colonies. And he was absolutely blown away, especially by the masks, the tribal masks. So yes, there are other tribal, other mask influences, but he really, why do I keep doing that? He really was most impressed by this Congolese mask. And as you were saying, this idea of channeling while wearing these masks was something that is just a given in those cultures, in Congo, in the cultures that made these. These are ceremonial. These are not tourist items. These aren't souvenirs. They were never meant to be. In fact, a lot of the Congolese people want them, African people want them back. They say, why are they in museums? These are sacred objects. They belong to us, very much in Aboriginal culture too. Why are they put in there just for their appearance? Just reminding people of the French Empire at 1900, a lot of Africa, what we call Vietnam, Madagascar, and so on. So there's a lot of, tribal artwork. And this kind of appropriation of Indigenous art is one of the things that Picasso's criticised for, that he was completely blown away, really went back to a studio and completely, added all of these masks, changed a lot about what he was doing. But the idea that people from, a more powerful culture will just go in and rape or take, the artworks take these objects as artworks from these colonies is something that's not really, it could be as equally levelled at Frida Kahlo, actually, because she was using culture that was not really her own. It was around her, but it was not her own culture. But anyway, on the right there, these are objects that were collected in, I think this is Breton's studio. I've just got a bit blank here, but the Surrealists were also mad about collecting primitive art, or especially masks and figures.
Mm-hmm.
And Picasso said, famously, bad artists imitate, great artists steal. And so he was not ashamed to be taking, colonial ideas, but it doesn't sit right. Oh, there's a good Banksy, but so he scrubbed out Picasso's name, but it really doesn't sit well. And this is kind of a controversial presentation that I think wouldn't fly in other states in Australia, where they'd be onto this with a bit more criticism, but that combines surrealist art of the 1910s, 20s, 30s with so-called primitive objects. And as you can see, there's one of your Wandjina figures. You can recognise that sort of above that chair there. So yes, Aboriginal art. Yeah, and so it's reducing all of these objects to these tribal, primitive, so-called objects, sacred objects, to artworks. And it's almost as though, well, thank goodness for the surrealists who discovered all this tribal art, because otherwise it would be meaningless. I mean, that's really what it comes down to in combining them. So it's quite contentious, and most of the other galleries in Australia would not dare do something like that.
Especially not to a Wandjina. No, absolutely not. Wandjinas are like the most of the most sacred imagery for the Kimberley regions. They consider this like only the shaman can depict an image of a Wandjina, and even then, all he's doing is repainting what's already on the rock paintings, and only he's allowed to do it. And this kind of to steal this image is like, no, they will come for you. They'll come for you.
And they're site specific too. They are meant to be in a place of ritual. So to take them out of that and drop them in a nice white cube, the gallery, well, what do we think of? What a wonderful rendition of a clown. That's it becomes simplistic. And someone like Hal Foster said that what's most horrifying, upsetting about colonialism like this is recoding and repositioning the tribal object as art. Is the aestheticization allows the work to be decontextualized and commodified. So it loses its meaning. And he says it sort of loses its... And I'm wondering whether in Picasso, I think he was aware of the magic, or at least he's responded to it. And we as contemporary critics don't recognise that he was recognising them as magical objects. So he describes about going to that ethnographic museum. A smell of mould and neglect caught me by the throat. I was so depressed that I would have chosen to leave immediately. Like, it was kind of, ugly and smelt bad. I forced myself to stay to examine the masks and the objects created with sacred magical purpose, to serve as intermediaries between them and the unknown, hostile forces around them, and attempting in that way to overcome their fears by giving them colour and form. So this idea of hostile forces, giving them colour and form, when we think about the brothel trauma, as you described, when you were saying about this 13-year-old trauma, then I understood what painting really meant. It's not an aesthetic process. It's a form of magic that interposes itself between us and the hostile universe, of seizing power, imposing a form on our terrors, as well as on our desires. That day I understood that I found my path. I don't think people really listen to him. They'll kind of say, they'll think of it as a simplistic method. I think he was responding to the deeply terrifying aspects of, the hostile universe, and the idea of taking control, seizing control, imposing control by the worship of these unknown forces. So, I think there's something in that people aren't listening to what he was saying even there. So we know that this is a mask that he owned, the one on the right. So it's literally repainted or, sketched from a mask that he owned. And another one that he owned, a Congolese mask. This is a self-portrait around the same time, 1907. And, that's almost a look of the terror of looking, isn't it? Of, the eyes are the thing, but this glazed over looking into the horror sort of self-portrait. And you could even see in early artworks, even when he had almost no money, he started buying African art, African objects. In fact, now, only as recently as 2006, someone has catalogued, 110 objects that he owned, where they came from. And he moved studios many times, and he always brought them with him.
Interesting.
So, okay, there's a tradition. We know that this is the part of what we think we know is in movies and so on enough, but the idea of there's a postcard that was 1890. I don't know if Picasso had seen it or not. I think they're probably fairly generic. This is the postcard of the girls on offer. The idea that the customer would choose one. That's the other thing. They're all offering. They're all there seducing, and and the visitor has to pick one. And remembering that Toulouse-Lautrec, around the same time, earlier than Picasso, but around the same time as that postcard, has a slightly different view. I think it's kind of interesting. He was more, we know he had lots of health problems. He was quite an odd-looking fellow. And he actually befriended quite a few prostitutes and had relationships with them. It's a little bit, we're seeing the side view there, aren't we? We're seeing the madam and the side view. It's not showing. And there's a whole big area of space on the left there for someone to walk into the painting, but it's not. It's the opposite of the demoiselles, I'd say. The other thing, this is upsetting. The other thing that Picasso was doing at the time was he would go to the hospital Saint-Lazare, prison hospital for people, women especially, who had venereal diseases, because they had worked as prostitutes. And just reminding people that venereal disease, and syphilis in particular, was just rife in Paris. All the artists had it, suffered from it. There was no cure. There were various treatments, but not very successful. And these poor women who had been prostitutes, short or long time periods, often were left with the scars of syphilis, which included decay of tissue. And he would go and sketch these women. So penicillin only available 1943, as late as that, before syphilis was able to be treated successfully. But anyway, I find that quite an upsetting aspect. The other thing that we have to say, well, this is kind of interesting, that he would put Fernanda's face at least twice in the artwork. Maybe her on the left as well, but definitely two of those women are Fernanda. That's his lover, his long-term lover at the time. She was an artist model, also living in the laundry boat. He asked her to move in with him. He used to lock her in during the day so that she couldn't go out and have a life of her own, but it would always be available for him if he went out or went to the movies, or sometimes he'd take her, sometimes he wouldn't. But is that also kind of putting some trauma about intimacy on the page, on the canvas? So these two figures who seem to be, it's very ambiguous. Are they looking with sadness, with, I wouldn't say aggression quite, but looking directly? It now becomes to me like a trauma of intimacy. Like this was his first long relationship, first lasting relationship. There's something really disturbing about, I think, I'm sure she would have found that, why putting my face in there twice. So just showing him at age 15, so 2 years younger than that, young Picasso, being confronted by these women. And, Picasso, again, one of his statements, painting isn't an aesthetic operation. It's a form of magic designed as mediator between the strange, hostile world of art and us, ways of seizing power by giving form to our terrors as well as our desires. So this is later than that other statement. And people will just use this as a throwaway magic. Oh, he's just being, he's just using a metaphor. This is a man who would only let one woman cut his hair and toenails, and they had to fold them up and put them away, date them, put them away in an envelope. He wouldn't let anybody else do that because he was afraid that those items could be used in magic against him. He knew what magic was.
Interesting.
And when we talk about trauma, his famous artwork, Guernica, painted 1937, so 30 years later, a very confident painter. This is during the war, or just pre-war actually, but the war was going on in Spain. This was when the Germans dropped bombs on a little village of Guernica during market day, and horrific casualties, deaths amongst the civilian population. And Picasso painted it in just over a month. Bombing happened in April. By May, he was painting it, finished it in June, and it was to be displayed in the 1937 Paris World's Fair. So, yes, it's a very confident, very skillful painting. We can read back, we can see Minotaur there and figures and weeping woman and horses and brutality. But to me, it's really like him. He's become his own graphic designer, hasn't he? And he talked about it because, Spain was his country of birth. As the trauma, being affected by the trauma of this horrible bombing of civilians in this village. But at the same time, I don't think there's trauma in the painting. The painting is about the trauma of these people, but he's not showing any trauma himself, is he? There's a confidence. Like, imagine that, making it in about a month compared to the 2 years of Demoiselles. And this was just some of the bombing and event, and trauma, is an emotional response to a distressing experience that is overwhelming, that can't be, it's like it can't be fully come to terms with, fully processed. So this is him painting Guernica in his studio. This is what I mean. He painted in dreadful light. He really just, over and over again, I find that kind of amazing. And Dora Maar, his lover at the time, one of his lovers at the time. Did I talk about that? Yeah, so the difference in the time periods. So there's a tapestry of Guernica. The original painting is in Spain, in the Prada Museum, I think. That this tapestry is famously in the United Nations Security Council, in front of which Colin Powell gave his weapons of mass destruction speech. So as much as you say these paintings about war, doesn't that really help us? It's an advertisement against war. Well, he could declare war. An artwork like this as propaganda, it just, they rarely have the effect that, that they're sold to us as. It just becomes a good background for that. John Berger, as I said, very, interesting writer. He was quite critical of Picasso. He was one of the first, I think, and perhaps one of the only serious critics of Picasso's. So writing in the 60s, 70s, and criticised the failure of Picasso from continuing to be at his own genius, the level of his own genius. So he's treated as royalty, wealthy, idolised. And this meant that he would just become a bit like the fable of Midas, that everything he turned to, he touched turned to gold. He could woo any woman he wanted. He could, everybody wanted even a little 2-minute drawing was, when people would buy it for thousands of dollars. And so this kind of sense of him losing his way, of being caught up in his own prestige. So let's go back to the beginning a little bit, where we think about Picasso when he first arrived in Paris. So Spanish artist coming from Barcelona, started to come to Paris actually at the time they were having a world fair there that he wanted to see, 1900. And by 1901, he was starting to visit there, stay there, live there, and pretty quickly found his way into a group of friends, or, there's a lot of artists working together. It was very, very cheap in Montmartre there. Max Jacob was extremely important contact. This becomes important later on. Homosexual Jewish poet, artist, occultist, openly occultist. He used to give readings. That was the way he earned his money. And introduced Picasso to Apollinaire, Braque, Cocteau, Modigliani, and opium. So all of these people, I don't know about Satie. Satie was the composer of all that beautiful music. But he was openly, into these kind of secret societies, Rosicrucian alchemy. He wrote about it. Jean Cocteau, lifelong, occultist. Grand Master, he said, of a Masonic lodge, the Priory of Zion, and Apollinaire, who Walter's interested in demonology, and he coined the term. So these are very influential people, very lively, creative people who were all into opium and all into occult. And so that was his first kind of group of connections. And we know Picasso, very ambitious. He wasn't just making friends. They're all like this. They're all using each other to be, to get further, to get there. We could say, well, to get their artwork seen, but a bit more than that. So all these, young lads or mates. But Max Jacob was Picasso's first lover in Paris. So again, it used to be talked about as just, well, okay, he had a homosexual lover and lived with him for 4 or 5 years, I think off and on. But when he stayed in Max Jacob's bed, there was one little bed in Le Bateau Loire, the laundry boat squat in Montmartre. And it's a funny thing that's been taken out of history a bit because, and I don't think, I mean, now more than ever, it's completely acceptable to have a homosexual relationship. But whether it's like Picasso's, the mythology around Picasso would be damaged by acknowledging that he had a lover, a male lover, for all that time. So that's kind of mysterious to me. And certainly Picasso did not want to own up to. I guess it doesn't fit the Latin lover, femme fatale, female seducer of his later life. So poor Max Jacob, horrible, really, what happened to him. So he was Jewish, but in 1909, so after he'd finished, that he and Picasso, no friends but not lovers, he'd had a vision of Christ and converted to Catholicism. And he actually wanted to, move away from his homosexual lifestyle. But in 1944, he was arrested by the Gestapo in France, during the Nazi occupation of Paris. And he was taken away to an internment camp where he would therefore afterwards be, all of those people were deported to places like Auschwitz. And at his arrest, Picasso was asked to sign an appeal. Picasso living in Paris, living in reasonably comfortable circumstances, hassled a bit by the Germans, not much, but he had a bit of influence. But Picasso declined, saying, Max is an angel. He could fly over the wall by himself. I just find that so upsetting.
That's dark.
And he didn't lift a finger, he had influence. He knew people who knew people. He could have saved him.
That's awful.
Yeah. So Picasso's in Paris. Yeah, he was hassled a bit by the Germans, but he continued to sell his paintings, including to some Germans. He didn't exhibit during that time. I think there's stories that he would, was he involved in the French resistance? I think after, during the war, you couldn't find anyone in the French resistance. After the war, everyone said they were in the French resistance. So what role they played or not, is a bit ambiguous. I don't think he played any kind of pivotal role. He kept his head down, went on with his work, and he came out fairly squeaky clean. But I think that thing about Max Jacob is just unconscionable. I guess there's just a sense of some other early traumas. I think I wanted to put this in because I just sort of wondered about, there's a few people that are close to him that died in mysterious circumstances. So Casagemas, who was Picasso knew from the days in Barcelona, died when he was shot himself in Paris. Casagemas was also like Picasso in Paris. And so publicly shot himself. And that was very traumatic for Picasso. And this is what prompted Picasso's blue period, this depression blue period. And, Picasso's still kind of finding his style, but really obviously moved by this. Around this time, Picasso does a drawing like this. Now, this is really rarely shown. 1902 self-portrait. So what does that pose say to us?
It reminds me of something Freemasonic, but I could be wrong with that.
Yeah. Well, it's oath taking, isn't it? Whether
Yeah.
it's Masonic or another, it's what you do in oath taking. Now, remember, if Picasso's looking in a mirror, that's his right hand. So the classic raise your right hand.
Yeah.
He's making some kind of oath. His eyes are highlighted. It's just a quick sketch, you know, it's never meant to be public, I think.
Mm.
Picasso depicting himself making an oath. Who or what was the oath to?
In a
This
mirror.
is not random. This is odd, really odd.
Mm.
So many secret societies at that time, so many occultists, so many, I mean, even, you know, I lived there about, 30 years ago for a year. Even then, there's lots of really weird little dens and shops in Paris. Still, I think they're mostly gone now. So they're not New Age shops, forget about that. They're more like something you'd find in New Orleans, I think. Odd little,
Mm.
they'd have, like magical books and grimoires and odd objects. And I mean, that's just a visible rendition of that. There's an undercurrent of, a belief or practicing of ritual magic, of secret societies. I think, we can give them names like, Freemasonry and so on. But in the end, they may or may not have had names, but they have traditions. And you know how the elites just call it the old religion. They don't even have a
Mm.
name for it. They just say it's the old religion. But this to me is a really weird admission or a reminder to himself of an oath taking. But to
Yeah,
who or what?
interesting.
So he was, after that portrait, really, he was smoking opium, you know,
hmm
regularly
So is this around the same
and
time
large
he
quantities.
had those friends mentioned earlier who were involved in occultism,
Yeah,
Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry? So
yeah,
despite the there's like an idea, isn't there? You're only as good as the people you hang around with, and it's kind of if
yeah,
you want to be successful in life, surround yourself with successful people. The people
yeah,
he was surrounding himself with, I'm hardly surprised he's making odd-looking mysticism oaths, and obviously had quite
yes,
occult things
yeah.
going on at that time.
Yeah.
It all
And
kind of
most
makes
of them a
sense.
little bit
Sense.
older than him, had been
Mm.
around and had contacts way far in advance of what he could have accessed otherwise. So what
Yeah.
he was dabbling in, I mean, this is just, he stopped opium when, excuse me, a friend of theirs, in their circle, hung himself in the laundry boat after,
Yeah.
a mix of opium, hashish, and ether. And Picasso found him, and he and Bernand just said that they saw him all the time after that. He was just haunting the place. It was just really, I mean, really horrific. But it just put him off opium at that point.
Mm.
Um, so around that time, Picasso met Gertrude Stein. So this is not insignificant. This is really important. So she became incredibly powerful. This was early on. Somehow he got her to commission a portrait of her, and famously, she said, "But Pablo, it doesn't look like me," and he said, "It will, it will." Which is kind of funny and true in a way because it's a very famous portrait of Gertrude Stein, and this is how I think we come to remember her. So, who was this Gertrude Stein? She's considered the mother of modernism, both in her own writing, her support for writers, and support for artists. So incredibly important patron of all of those spheres, and some of the names, not by exhaustive by any means, including F. Scott Fitzgerald, Hemingway, Ezra Pound, Sherwood Anderson, Paul Bowles, and then artists like Matisse, Braque, Derain, Picabia, and Picasso were, really supported by her early on. Suddenly became really famous when the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas gave her status. But she kind of just appears out of nowhere as this American with money who first went to England and then to Paris and started collecting and having these salons. So regular, basically every Saturday night, all of these artists and writers or any collection would come around there and, talk about art. I don't know what they were doing actually, but they were, this coterie. But she was financially supporting them. But more than that, kind of building this idea of modernism. I don't know that you can imagine modernism without a few key figures like her giving it
Mm.
a form, giving it a platform. So this is not to be underestimated. So this is her and her lover, Alice B. Toklas. And I just have to say, sometimes when I have a hot chocolate, my husband has to point out I have a lady beard on my upper lip. And I don't think this is a lady beard. So
Mm.
she had a moustache. Alice B. Toklas. So anyway, I don't feel that bad about making fun of this. Is they were lovers for about 40 years, about Alice, because she was a really nasty nasty woman. People who said that at the time and people who said that later. I won't leave to comment on the right hand side, but it's not a lady beard is all I'll say. So that's Alice B. Toklas on the right. So she also, I think, sort of appears out of nowhere. Within a day of arriving in Paris, she lives with Stein, and she was her factotum, her secretary, completely polished. Stein told Stein how great she was, how incredibly gifted she was, and not much is made about this. But people, will sometimes show that, like in a portrait, as she was just this background figure, like the bridesmaid in the background of the wedding that was Gertrude Stein. But some people say she was Stein's handler. Nobody came and went without her say-so. She had lots of contacts. They both did lots of contacts. So she was not a small part in the piece either, even though Stein was the writer, a so-called self-professed literary genius. But they collected an amazing array of art. I mean, museum level, Renoirs, Bonnards, Manets, the Fauves, Cubist. I mean, unbelievable. Collected, you can imagine the amount of money they had to pay. It wasn't much then. All right, it was huge risk, but not a risk if you know where the current is going. Is it? If you're in charge of the current, you know which boat will get you there. I'm not saying she did it for money only. I do not think that. That's the whole point. There's some other reason for her being in Paris, setting up these salons, promoting radical modern art, radical modern writing. This is where modernism began. By the way, a lot of Jewish people are quite angry at Stein because they say, how did she come to own all of this art, including, when she was during World War II she was in the south of France, but she stood by while fellow Jews were being robbed, tortured, murdered, and she and her collection were being safeguarded by a Nazi collaborator. So Stein was Jewish, but there was a really weird level of protection around Stein.
Especially an American one as well.
American, yeah.
That's
American.
Odd. You would think that would be another prime target for...
That's right. At any time, she could leave Paris. She could leave France. The French people couldn't. That was the trouble. They were being detained, sent to camps, but persecuted. But she was left alone. I mean, she left Paris, but I mean, that Paris, probably in danger of being bombed, at least the thought was then. But she was friends with the Vichy government, which people, see as complete traitors, and especially close friends with Bernard Fay, who was the figure who protected her and yet Stein never mentions him in her memoirs. So someone really pivotal, really important. Fay himself was condemned to after the war was put on trial and sent to a labour camp. But there's no doubt he protected them. Stein wrote speeches for Pétain, the head of the Vichy government in France. She admired Hitler, she admired Franco, but none of this sticks. It's very odd. She's still seen as this, as I said, this unlikely mother of modernism. Isn't it funny how often people you suspect of being, when I say agent of cultural change, I kind of think agent by a pun, like literally, like someone like Alistair Crowley was at one stage an agent, an operative for multiple groups, including German. They always like to present themselves in front of an American flag or something, don't they? So she's, Miss America. And this is a researcher. I can't say that I completely agree with him, but I mean, he's done a lot of research where he says modern art was created as a Sabbatean ritual of redemption through sin and destruction. The idea that the more corrupt, the more chaos, the more evil is being perpetuated and expressed, the closer we will come to the end of the world, and then Satan will rule. I mean, that's their thinking. So this person, I mean, obviously the early works of people like, Matisse and Picasso and Samuel Beckett and so on. I mean, they're pretty tame by modern standards, but that's the point. You couldn't expect modern standards to be where they are if there weren't these early forays away from, the sense of beauty in art or art that uplifts. It has to be always this kind of, the most promoted, this degeneracy. So he says, this researcher says that she was used in the transgender agenda, and she has really weird connections with people like Radcliffe College that were, programmatic, the agenda, LGBTQI, MAP kind of agenda. But he says, very interesting, absolutely irrefutable, is that she studied at Harvard under William James and was interested in theosophy at one stage. This is just more writing on him. People might want to read this or not. I can't say I can vouch for everything he says, but I appreciate someone doing this kind of research. But the interesting thing was her own writing it was called even at the time automatic writing, but it was a technique that she learnt when she was under William James and other early psychologists, where it wasn't just like opening, going in meditation, opening to channel. It was using some other background voice, music, record, and then to write with this chaos around them. And so her early automatic writing was the idea of splitting the brain, I think, there's a short way of thinking about it. Very complicated. And people like B.F. Skinner, we'll hear about him in a while, in a couple of presentations, studied her writing because it's this interesting phenomenon, which I think in a way we're kind of starting to understand this. While we are accessing things that appear to be our thoughts during times of distraction, where is that coming from? Where is that distracted content, this creative distracted content coming from? And can it be increased with greater distraction noise around us? And it's something, it's sort of interesting. And I can't say I've done enough research on it, but I feel it's a technique that someone like Gurdjieff, the early 20th century mystic, also experimented with. Anyway. Meanwhile, a little bit later than Gertrude Stein, Peggy Guggenheim is doing a similar thing, first in America, then Paris, then Venice, where she's gathering around her and purchasing and becoming the patron of incredible artists, that we would now see as, well, they're just the foundation of modernism: Picasso, Braque, Magritte, and literature, Joyce, Beckett. But it's hard to imagine those artists getting the foothold that they have without these early supporters. And you say, well, she just had like Stein, she had a great eye for it. She said herself she didn't know what to buy. People had to tell her what to support. She, if you read about Peggy Guggenheim's life, she's almost like an MK Ultra figure. She's really, really kind of an odd, unconscious, very weird life, extremely, like, she boasted that she slept with 1,000 men and couldn't remember most of them, and heavy use of heroin and amphetamines, and yet again, someone that we're supposed to admire. Her daughter struggled with addiction and died quite young, and her motto was, I'll buy one work of art a day, not I'll support the greatest artists of my time. I'll buy one great work of art. So she was a kind of a simpleton. Stein wasn't, but Peggy Guggenheim, I have to say, who had a lot of people around her influencing her. So there she is with Jackson Pollock, down on the bottom right, she had sex with him. On the left is Max Ernst. She was married to him for a while. But again, another agent of cultural change. So they're the front figures, is what I'm saying. They're the front figures for something else.
Oh, definitely. I definitely got the vibe that the culture creators were heavily involved in all of this as you were speaking. It's kind of conveniently placed people at the right time. Telling us what is and is not good and what should be in the forefronts of culture, and the ties there to the Theosophical Society mentioned earlier as well. And it all makes sense to me. Like I said, I've never thought any of this was organic. Like modern arts, the falling away from beauty standards, it all felt orchestrated to me. And what you're showing me here is like these early moments where it's kind of this was all there's some kind of hidden hand behind all of this, making this happen, and the characters we see who are supposedly the ones who made it happen, patsies, front figures,
And yet it's part of the myth, isn't it? The myth was he was a genius. He was just the best artist. All of these people were just the best artists. They had a contest. They were the best artists. That's the ones. Whereas it's this spontaneous efflorescence of culture influencing one another. Yes, they influence one another, but there's something much more programmatic going on. In a couple of presentations time, we're going to look at that in a bit more detail. And, there are always these things. So Guggenheim, group photo, various artists with her in exile. And to me, okay, by 1942, they'd had a measure of success, but who makes group photos unless they think they're going to be part of history? Do you know what I mean? These are people who they would have known of each other, as you would if you lived in the same neighbourhood. Some were friends, most were just colleagues, whatever. But somehow it's like, let's have a group photo because we're making history. And and you just see it over and over, the Dada artists of the 1920s. Very weird. There's a brother of that Bernard Fay in this painting, in this photo as well. You just think, hang on, who makes group photos unless they feel that they're part of a class or a society that are going to be part of history? Surrealists in Paris.
That's
like a football
strange.
team or something, isn't it? Yeah. Life magazine. So also the magazine is promoting them like that. So, this is the new art. We'll see in a few presentations time. I want to look at about that. It definitely does not take just, talent and creativity to make art. And we can look at a couple of examples where it was sort of real injustices were done because they weren't promoted. And no surprises here, the CIA funded Museum of Modern Art and a number of travelling exhibitions of abstract expressionist artists. This one's not even this is mainstream. This is just the documentation has come out, and we won't go into detail now, but the abstract expression artists were promoted by America to places like Europe, Japan, and so on, as this is, see what art and individualism can do. This is art of the new world. So it's not conspiracy if you find the documentation on it. And to me, it's a bit like there's a lot of research has been done in the music industry. Say, I think it's done differently in different generations, but in the 1960s and 70s, the group in Laurel Canyon, so all of those, those Graham Parsons, Grateful Dead, Mamas and the Papas, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, they were all literally living in this one canyon in California, and going through some of them obviously going through mind control experimentation, and coming out, being promoted as instant stars, Jim Morrison. And then when you look at how many of them had parents in defence, literally high up in the military, or in intelligence. So this is a good example of someone who's done a lot of research, but the research has yet to be written about other eras and the art world. So an example of Stein's own meteoric push for herself was she'd been to England a couple of times, gave a lecture, a bit obscure, at Oxford University in 1926, self-published most of her writings. They were quaint little odd poetry books, nothing special. And then her autobiography is Alice B. Toklas, which is a prose book written by her as if it was, about Alice's life, was written in 6 weeks, published in 1933, the same year, promoted on the cover of Time magazine, wasn't even available yet for sale, and she was giving a lecture tour across America with billboards. Literally billboards about her. So, I mean, this is just like, forget about, this is an interesting artwork, this is an interesting poetry, a book that's making waves. No, this is what you're supposed to look at. Oh, it's not available yet. Insane. Yeah. She herself said, when you write a book, you need someone to say yes to it. Yeah, they'll say that again. Yes, in a big way. And someone else talking about more about literary modernism, so the way literature writing was being promoted in the universities, again as a Cold War sort of program. Well, that's the way he saw it, and he's got a lot more, what we call receipts and proofs. So Gertrude Stein involved in that. So career of Picasso is long. He painted for 70 years. He died at age 91. So, and from the time he was a child, he was involved in art. And I cannot pretend to do justice to all of these works, or it's already a bit long, this presentation. But just reminding people that his significant oeuvre, no other artist has been more prolific. That people say things like he made an average of 2 works a day, but he was also pretty social. Like, he loved to network. He loved to go out and meet famous people and be seen at famous things. He loved going to bullfights, all of those things. So he worked really hard, but he also, he was quick with his art. And then can we find, what we're looking for is a little bit more what I call visual proof, or at least visual questioning, speculation. Are there occult symbols in his artwork? He said, I simply painted images of what was before my eyes. It's for others to find hidden meaning in them. Well, so I think he's sort of alluding to the fact, because people weren't finding hidden meaning in his artwork. They really weren't. I see it, what you see is what you get. And one of the most famous, though recognisable figures would be, the satyr faun figure. And he's often sort of presenting himself as this, randy goat, half beast, half, salacious faun, who just couldn't get enough sex. And, I still say most of the art, most of the writing, it's about, that old scallywag, whereas we know there's a little bit more to that. And he would have known too that this tradition of Pan in Greek and Roman times, and associated with Dionysus, the green man, the orgies, the chaos, the groves, and we're reminded that, remember, Crowley and Jack Parsons were mad about Pan. We're soliciting Pan, so acting out Pan. So maybe it's not just about the sex. Is what his biographers will say, he's just loved sex, but it's a bit more than that.
As I mentioned earlier, Harlequin is a direct inspiration of this, the same character. Everything you just showed there earlier with Dionysus and his band of fauns and satyrs, it was the Thracian culture where Dionysus comes from, where you find the wild man tradition originates from, and that's what Harlequin was modelled after. And again, he painted Harlequin himself, so it's kind of, I think he must have known this connection. If this is kind of,
he must have,
sure. He must have,
he would have. He looked at lots and lots of other art. He was very interested in traditions and fairy tales and excuse me, mythology and so on. But it's funny, isn't it, that it's almost like if the general population or the general population of art lovers / critics are looking at this and saying, look, he's making these transgressive acts as being, completely enveloped in sex. Are they just saying that they themselves are kind of, I don't know, stitched up, and they're sort of championing his animalistic acting out of activities that they are, that they are purely fantasizing about? I mean, otherwise I can't see that they can't, that are they contemplating that he's actually perhaps embodying Pan? Well, if they don't believe Pan is real. This is an interesting one by Dali, a colleague, you'd say, of Picasso. And Dali was always very jealous of Picasso, but again, they used each other for promotion. And he said that Picasso was a destroyer of art, concerned with ugliness, whereas Dali, embraced beauty. Well, I think we'd beg to differ, but, Dali just said all these sort of silly things. But this artwork is pretty interesting. So, portrait of Picasso, mocking his prestige, showing him as the Pan figure, the goat, the curly-headed goat figure, in a bust covered in melting flesh, evoking his genius, and there's sort of liquid gold coming out of his, through his hair, which is the goat's hair coming out. So it's like he's sort of saying he's channeling this Pan-like figure, and this weird rock on his head, and the guitar that's used a lot in his signature. I feel like this is actually fairly revealing of something that he knew or he understood about Picasso's artwork that, it's no longer just sexual here, is it? It's in the
Mm.
way that critics would normally write about it. And this is it's just staggering sometimes. So a auction house, I don't know, for Sotheby's or Christie's or someone, writes a text, a beautiful Dionysian scene created by Picasso in his studio at the Villa
Yeah.
in Cannes. You think, a beautiful Dionysian scene. This is lush debauchery, violence, and there will be blood.
It's funny you brought this scene up, because I was going to say earlier, like, if he's depicting himself as a satyr, then what he is depicting himself is a devotee of Dionysus, which is what satyrs are. People who follow Dionysus for long enough turn into satyrs or maenads, which is like the female version in a way, like a siren type figure of some kind, but basically it's kind of, you get caught up in Dionysus's spell and influence, which is debauchery, sex, alcohol, theatre, all that kind of thing, dance, and you lose your humanity and become like a wild beast creature. So if he's depicting himself as a satyr, then he's depicting himself as a devotee of Dionysus, and here is a full Dionysus scene created by Picasso. So it's just funny. It just, he was clearly
it's true. It's like it's in agreement. It's in tribute to that. It's no longer just this kind of messing about in animalistic. This is ritual space, or at least a tribute to the god of Pan. I just had to show. So the other figure is the Minotaur, which we'll talk about in a minute. But somebody on an online comment said it's like everything is made from, not public hairs, pubic hairs. Pubic hairs. I thought that's funny. Everything's made from pubic hairs, but it is true. It's and there's several partners and bacchanal. But so lots and lots of references to the Minotaur, and consciously seeing himself. He would, as we saw with his playing around with masks, etc. So Minotaur caressing a sleeping woman, rape, so lots of rape as the Minotaur, and I don't know, excusing his bad behavior at the very least, but in other situations, literally embodying, So, they can write so cleanly and sweetly about, his ambivalence between his lust and his love for women, his animality, bestiality, and his, tenderness. And you think, it's just kind of nonsense, really. So, Minotaurs everywhere. So there's Minotaur myth is from the Greek myth, where there's a labyrinth in which this half-man, half-beast creature has been put there by King Minos. And, the woman is sent in, or that Perseus, is sent in to slay the beast. And he's given a ball and thread by a woman who allows him to go into the Minotaur to find his way unharmed, and to find his way back out to slay the Minotaur, to come out. So it's not saying he's acting out that myth. It doesn't in a one-for-one way, but he and the surrealists absolutely loved this idea of the, where are we? Oh, I haven't got a slide. They love this myth of the idea of having to go in deeply to seek the dark corners of their own unconscious to find this animalistic truth, this sexual animalistic truth. So that was their reading. I don't think it's the only possible reading of a Minotaur from the Greek myth. And we see it in Guernica, we see it in other, there's often with dead animals or, sacrificial beasts. So whether he couldn't put a female figure there, but he's got a dead horse. He seemed to go off the women when they'd had their children, his children. He seemed to have lost interest in them a bit then. So a mare and a foal, again, the mare is just a drag on him. This brood mare, the woman, the mother of his children, becomes like a burden. So he loved bullfighting. As I said, he loved the gore, he loved the violence, he loved the blood. And we sort of believe that the tradition of bullfighting itself comes from tauroctony, which is goes back to the Mithraic cult, which itself probably goes back to Zoroastrian times. But the Roman cult, you always see this depiction, Mithras slaying the bull, scorpion and snake under his feet, the heavens opening up. There are just these elements that repeat. The Phrygian hat that he's always wearing, slaying a bull. You see this depiction over and over, still in Rome. You just see it on plaques, and all over what was the Roman Empire. You still see these plaques and temples. But I'm suggesting that maybe he did know that he was very well aware that this thing comes from a Mithric secret society, a cult society. Now, in theory, that Mithric cult society was no longer in use, even, I don't know, fall of the Roman Empire. But before that, these cult chambers were scattered around. I think there are 6 they found already in Germany, several in Spain, quite a few in France. They're underground temples where these very secret initiations would take place. And we don't know much about them because it was one of those, pain of death forever revealing, what went on. But there were levels, so it was hierarchical initiations like in Freemasonry. And it was also anybody could join, or anybody in one sense could join. So it was very popular amongst the militaristic, the Roman legions. Not everyone would be accepted, but if you were accepted in the cult of Mithras, you might be a centurion, but you might be higher rank in that Mithraic temple than a general. But it's so well maintained, the secrecy. They've just found some of these objects, like they said, the plaques, the statues. It involved feasting. And, we really are very, very likely that this is an early version, or, that Freemasonry owes a lot to this secret society. So I'm saying that Picasso knew this when parts of Spain that he was from, he would have known about these very old Mithraic traditions, and whether the secret societies that we have no name for, or you and I don't particularly have a name for, were part of this, and it involved initiations. It's so important to him, this Minotaur figure. I also associated with Moloch, so Baphomet, Moloch. And
I was
on the right
thinking of
is
Baal, at the same time.
yes, yeah. Man-raised depiction of, human figure, just the way the light captures it to look like a Minotaur. So, and also contemporary of Picasso, knew Picasso well, another very important change agent in modernism. So these are the stelas that go back to Carthage and before, Ammonites in the in the Bible being depicted there. But literally, these stones give evidence, that this was a very widespread cult. And I don't know, this is a bit of a long shot, but I've been involved at various times in my life with helping people to release entities. So what we would currently probably call deliverance. And, very, very serious work and very cautious work. But someone like, what's his name? The demon eraser, Brian. What's his last name? Brian.
I'm
Who's
not sure of
on,
his last name. I just know him as Brian. But yeah, he runs the YouTube
Brian
channel.
who's
Yeah.
on JT's show a lot and so on. And he talks about it too, that I've more than once seen when an entity is released, it's a figure that sits up that's got the head of a bull and the body of a human. This is really weird, really weird. And I would be surprised if Brian hasn't seen the same thing. I bet you he has. Now, I'm not saying that it's not every demonic attachment, but there is a pattern. And I know this is long shot. Imagine me referencing Dave Mustaine from Megadeth, but he was heavily into witchcraft, and he talks about here one of the great deliverances he had was in a Filipino priest pulled out basically the equivalent of a minotaur. He calls it a bull, but a half bull, half human came out, and he had this incredible release afterwards. And Picasso uses the term summoning the bull. I know it's a term from bullfighting, but there's something playing out there, like summoning the muse, summoning the bull. The Surrealists were interested in the Minotaur, so the magazine their magazine from the 1930s onwards. And they were interested, as I said, in that link between the subconscious, like the labyrinth of our darkest, deepest shadow self, being locatable by accessing through these, unbridled sexual, transgressive acts. And, it's surprising who turns up as the cover of these magazines. It was both modernist artwork and writing in these magazines. So
Interesting.
Picasso himself, already earlier. So this biographer, John Richardson, saying that Picasso needed to rejuvenate his psyche, to summon, to renew his imagery. This brilliant sequence, this brilliance came from a summoning, a ritual summoning. And this is what a muse looks like. It's interesting how often mirrors come up in his artwork as well. This idea of, what is he seeing in the mirror? What are they seeing in the mirror? What is he seeing? Is he seeing, this is the way he's seeing these figures with his eyes open. You talked about Harlequin. Thank you for that input, because it's quite a time period. I think when he was on the cusp of something, both kind of involved in joining these kind of occult groups that were all around him, on the edges of that, but also had the humanity to question that inside. There's an ambivalence in that, just as we see, Les Demoiselles d'Avenue, and it's not just a celebration of unbridled female sexuality. It's an awkwardness about that. It's his own self-portrait, presents himself as Harlequin. I think even those other portraits are sort of self-portraits, and this one's fairly abusive of self, I'd say, on that monochrome self-portrait. Later on, showing himself, this is age 83. I would say this is kind of like the old clown circus, isn't it? In the circus, who's really, he's really past his use-by date, isn't he? The wig doesn't stay on anymore. He hasn't got the physical prowess to do the stunts. It's a bit sad. So later in life too, he would say things like, "Oh, death has no fear for me. Oh, it's got a kind of beauty." And he'd paint these skulls, especially during the wartime, which, okay, you can say he's, responding to the darkness of the war. But he really was fascinated by skulls, or partly, the remains of a lamb's head or a pig's head. And you can chart his whole life really through these self-portraits that are, go through the various styles in his artwork, age 15 to 85. But what I wanted to just look at is one that was made the year before his death, less than a year before his death, is this pretty famous portrait now, which to me just looks like an image of terror. He went on to make a few more self-portraits. I've got them on the right there that he made. I mean, that was the very last one, the bottom right one, which just looks like something like Robert Crumb or something, but a real, almost cartoonish, like turning into stone, turning into, the giant that's turned into stone. But to me, that just looks like terror. And he called it self-portrait facing death. And as much as he might say he's not afraid of death, I think, we'd beg to differ. His children beg to differ. As I said, they said he was terrified of death. His lovers said he was terrified of death, would never let people mention it. And that's why he didn't write a will, because that would be admitting, that there was death. But I sort of feel like, if there was humanity left in Picasso, as I hope and believe there is for all of them, I think it was starting to wonder about, these kind of choices and this incredible worldwide success and prestige in his life.
I guess I see there a fear of judgment more than anything.
Yeah.
What's coming next,
What's coming next, or what have I done, or what was that all about? And I don't know to you, but I'm not sure that I completely ready to take on. I have to really give it some more thought that that modernism was this Sabbatean, Frankish celebration of decadence. Certainly that's where we are now. But it's also some of that early modernism. I mean, you would have been schooled in it as well, to admire those artists, and we admire their skill level, we admire their talent. Their artworks still have appeal. But it's a bit modernism is a bit like it was the water that the fish is swimming in, isn't it? Like you don't see the water. This is it. We're in modernism and now we're in postmodernism. And, you know, like, well, of course, everybody wanted to achieve modernism and these people achieve modernism really, really well. But it's a bit like, I know the metaphor seems to me like if you've ever been in a bad relationship and you kind of stuck it out and you tried to make the best of it and you had some good moments and then it ends and it's over and you think, oh, what was that all about? What was that all about? I was so, why did I stay that long? And I think it's there's a little bit of modernism is like that. We have yet to come to terms with what it's done to us or how we have fitted in to its program. So modernism is more an agenda, I think, than it's certainly not this spontaneous efflorescent event that was inevitable and arose around us and just grew and grew. You know, there were moments where it was extremely strategically promoted and early days, but look where we are now.
Yeah, well, it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. But go ahead, sorry.
Oh, one last thing, just really about, you know, we're sort of familiar with this one-eyed stuff. So I don't think these one-eyed portraits, you know, in magazines weren't common back then, 1940s, 50s, 60s. They're really common now. But there are a couple of early ones. So John Milley, who was these are done by famous photographers for very influential magazines. So just as today, those one-eyed portraits of celebrities, musicians and so on are presented in, you know, fan magazines, Vogue magazine, Rolling Stone, whatever. So you have to have the cahoots of the photographer and the magazine. You may or may not have the artist or the person being photographed aware. I would say mostly they are, but some claim they didn't know why they were told to put this covering over one eye. Very famous photographer Arnold Newman photographing Picasso. I know it's half-hearted. It's only a partial cover of the eye, but this wasn't happening then yet. You know, it's happened so in our face now. It's literally so obvious. And what these people, as I understand, we think we understand and then we find out a bit more and, you know, we're often shocked again. But it seems to be that these are not necessarily bloodline people, but who have made a certain rank, a certain grade, you know, gone through certain initiations, and they signal now to their colleagues their status and their commitment. So they signal their oath. So I think that there's meaning for that, and they are then promoted. That's why you see them in these magazines and television and so on. So it's not just, it's, you know, partly to mock, but it's also to signal to others who's in the club now and what status they are at.
Yeah.
And Irving Penn, now third really famous portrait photographer for a specific magazine. So I feel like that's kind of interesting because this way predates that tradition. And maybe I'll just one thing I did want to go back. I think I just wanted to say, in terms of when we were talking about the mask, you already sort of were heading towards that these objects which Picasso owned. I've also, you might have had experience with this too. I can think of at least two, maybe three situations where people brought home an object from Papua New Guinea, Africa, masks from Africa, and Indonesia, and weird things started happening in the house. Really weird things. And they got rid of that object and the weird things stopped. And remembering that, as you say, these are ceremonial objects. They're objects of magic. They are not tourist souvenirs. They are charged. They are, what would be the word for it? They are, you know, ceremonially specific. They are housings for spirits or methods for contacting spirits.
Well, yeah, they're a direct channel to the spirit realm. I mean, the way these cultures will tell you, whether it's in Africa, India, China, the oceanic regions, Japan, you know, even in Siberia, where you have shamanism, in the northern Americas, in, the Inuit cultures, all the way down to the Heyoka cultures, the Pueblo Indians, or the cross for the Haida Gwaii regions for the Pacific Northwest. Then you go travel further down, you go to New Mexico, you go to South America, you all the way down to the very tip, of the South America. All these cultures that do this tradition, it's called ancestor spirit worship. That's what we as Western anthropologists have labeled it, ancestor spirit worship. But they all have a common thread. They dress like something to channel the spirit of said thing from the spirit realm. That's what they mean by venerating or worshipping or communicating with ancestors. They don't mean like grandma or granddad. They mean like the primordial gods that created the world and or the cultural civilization. The ancient ones. And what they do is they specifically dress in a certain way, usually very colorful, very shiny, very frilly, very wavy, very patterned, repeat patterned, polka dotted, zigzag stripes, whatever, name it, something very colorful, usually with whatever they've got for the specific region or culture, be it straw, paint, gems, fabrics, whatever it is they have to mind, and they have various ways of doing it, but they also have kind of a similar aesthetic, very colorful, and they always wear a mask, and the mask always has very white, matte, single-coloured features to it, less colourful than the rest of the body that they're wearing. Usually red lips is very common, and if they don't have a mask, they will white the face up with chalk paint, put a red mouth on as well, and wear a red headdress of some kind. Very much reminiscent of a clown, but what they're really mimicking here is like a human-animal hybrid, a very colourful reptilian serpent being or a bird-like being of some kind. Feathered headdresses are common as well. And when they do it specifically to mirror the spirit of this god that they're now wearing the skin of, that exists in the spirit dimension just parallel to the earth. And by dressing like the thing, they create a channel to the thing in the spirit realm, and then they get embodied by that spirit. So they dress like the thing to be possessed by the thing. And they then communicate with, as a vessel for the tribe, communicate with the god through the person now possessed. And they get information, knowledge, power, whatever they can from the thing. And that is basically a Tuesday afternoon for these people. To us, it's wild. It makes no sense, and it's crazy superstition and nonsense. But for these cultures, this is a standard practice, and it's very well known why they're doing it and what they're doing it for. We in the West have kind of, like I said, we have a different view on all of that kind of stuff, and we don't see that or understand that what masks are capable of, or what even costume is capable of. So if you bring one of these masks into your home, you have brought something that quite literally represents a spirit. That's what it is, and they are used specifically to bring the spirit from the other realm to ours. That's what it's for. So to bring that into your home, I mean, what are you doing really when you think about that? If what those tribes are doing is true and real and actually has any basis in reality, you're playing with fire. Get them out of your home,
and willingly too. It's by agreement. You're welcoming, you're agreeing, you're willingly allowing that to cross your threshold.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and. So so some of this, I mean, I'm not excusing him, but I'm just saying he was a very weird man. And all of these aspects of him, this drivenness, things went really strange. And he died a pretty, I have to say, pretty isolated, lonely figure, regardless of this incredible success. But we don't look at that, do we? We're not allowed to look at those sorts of aspects. But the idea that it was just this difference between his foibles and his art, and both things need to be understood better.
Yeah, fascinating.
So that's enough for Picasso. That's all we need. That's all we need of him, I think.
That was great. That was thanks for doing that, Susan. I really appreciate it. That was fascinating. I've learned a lot. I've learned so much there. And I'm sure the people listening have learned a lot as well. People really enjoy your presentations. The reviews are in. People like them. They're going viral. I think the last one we did got 11,000 views, which is amazing. I think let's just keep going on with this series. Let's bring more to the people of what they want. and people are describing you as the art lecturer they wish they had at university. So
that's nice. Yeah, I wish I'd had all as students, because But I think that what I've noticed, I've really, apart from their people just sort of encouraging, which is always really lovely, but they're asking more questions. Do you know, like, this leaves us with more questions than answers, these kinds of discussions. And that's as it should be. Don't take the received mainstream view as the be all end all. There's a lot more going on, and it's like we're just getting wise to it, and we're learning, and we're opening to knowledge and understanding, and where we are today.
Absolutely. Yeah, like I said, I've tried to encourage people who watch this, like, look, we're giving you an alternative answer here, an alternative view, something you probably haven't read in the books. And we come at it from a Christian conspiracy contrarian kind of standpoint, sure, but we're not forcing that view on you necessarily. I bet it's a view that most people probably haven't actually heard before.
Yeah,
so that's what
it
is.
Not really popular.
It's not a popular one.
Mainstream. No. Yeah.
No.
Well, thanks for the platform. Thanks for all that you do. It's really great to have this platform and discussion and debate going on, and getting people to think and ask questions and look at their own understanding. It's
absolutely brilliant. I'm looking forward to the next one. Have you got any hints to what's coming next?
I think spies, and jazzy spies, CIA and spies.
Interesting. I'm looking forward to that one.
Won't say more because
well, you can always leave them wanting more, haven't you? Absolutely right. Well, thanks for that, Susan. I really appreciate it.
Right. My pleasure.
We'll speak to you again soon. God bless.